Here's a brief agenda of what I'm going to cover. These are the main topics. What is DevOps? What does it mean for you and your organization in that order? What is DevOps? Is DevOps a role? Is it tools, automation? Is it a process? Or is it just marketing hype? DevOps is a movement driving optimization of value delivery. Wow, can this be more abstract? It's very broad and very, very abstract, but it's intentionally broad and abstract. Even though it seems like it's saying too many things, this is it. This is what DevOps is. This is this is what we do when we say we're doing DevOps, right? What we're trying to do is we're optimizing the process of delivering value, right? That could mean anything. It could mean we're building a product and we're optimizing how we build that product. It could mean how we perform certain business processes. It could mean how we sell. It could mean anything, right? The idea behind DevOps is that it's driving optimization of that value delivery chain. And sure, the most common thing we do to make this happen is automation, right? But it's not automation. DevOps is not automation. It's a lot more than that. And this distinction is important. Why is it important? I always feel that to understand things, you have to go a little bit into the history and understand how we got here, right? It's important to understand the context. And so I'm showing you a snippet of a book that I'm going to recommend at the end. That's sort of the Bible of DevOps, if you will. But while the foundation of DevOps has derived from things like lean theory of constraints and Toyota Kata, which some of you might know as Kanban, many view DevOps as the logical continuation of Agile, and I'm one of those people, right? So I think that the DevOps is taking DevOps to the next level. In fact, the way I view DevOps is that it completes the cycle. First, we had a long time ago, we had the initiation of Agile movements by different names, right? We had Scrum, and we had all kinds of different approaches, but essentially everyone kind of had this idea of let's make things lean, let's focus on results, let's remove bureaucracy, let's remove things that don't add value, and that was Agile, right? With different variations and names. And then Agile could only go so far, right? You can be super agile, and if you're working on a physical infrastructure with limitations, what you have to do is you're still stuck, right? If you have to go and I've had this experience myself. I've actually put a hard drive on a credit card to add to a data center because of the process for acquiring a new hard drive was just too complicated. And the delay was in weeks or months to add capacity to our infrastructure. So enabling Agile to achieve its mission, we had to remove the barriers of the physical barriers, right, of infrastructure, and that's where cloud came in, right? First with virtualization, and then with the advanced services and products that it offers now. So cloud enabled us to truly be agile, and we could spin off a new environment in a matter of minutes rather than wait for business processes to kick in and approval of budget and this and that. In fact, in my experience in consulting, what I've seen very often is one of the challenges that we have to solve for many organizations was that many organizations had infrastructure distributed across multiple accounts on AWS, for example, because people just used their personal credit cards. They didn't wait for process. They knew that they can spin off an environment quickly and get the job done, so they just put it on their own credit card. And then they ended up with all of these accounts across different AWS accounts and without visibility into the cost structure. having these two alone was not enough, right? To complete the cycle, that's where DevOps comes in, right? You're optimizing the value delivery in this cycle, and that's in my view, this is what completes this picture. And then you have this smooth running flow of value delivery. Okay, so DevOps is a movement. How do you apply movement to an organization? Well, you create a DevOps culture. What is DevOps culture? Well, you move from an environment where some of you might not know this because some of these things have been fixed for a while now, but they still do exist in larger organizations, especially. So you move from an organization with large siloed teams. What does this mean? You have very large teams that work in parallel. They have sometimes they even have completely different reporting structures. So one team reports completely to different people, one team reports to different people, and they don't have their visions aligned. They don't have their priorities aligned. And they're very large. Large is the key term here. You had processes that relied on humans, and humans are error prone. Reproducible processes that rely on humans are always prone to errors. You had distributed responsibility. You had person X that was responsible for something, and then person Y was responsible for something else. And whenever you have this distributed responsibility model, then you need a lot of coordination, and not just in terms of communication and collaboration, but also priorities. If I'm an engineer in the engineering department, which I'm speaking from experience here in large organizations, my priority is to develop product X. When we had to deploy this to QA even, I would have to work with the ops department, and their priorities were making the infrastructure survive the challenges that they were dealing with. So they would just put me on a queue. My objective was put on hold of delivering a product because they had other priorities. And then this eventually happens when you have all these things, right? You have delegated blame. Whose fault was it? This didn't happen. Well, it's not my fault. I sent an email. Oh, it's not my fault. They didn't fill out the form. It's not my fault. I have these other things to do, right? And then it's a fault-driven culture. And then again, all of these lead to priorities that are driven by politics. If you have, especially in organizations where you have completely independent silos, you've got one group that reports to the CTO, for example, and then one group that reports to the CFO. The CFO wants to get products in the marketplace. They're competing with other companies. The CTO just need stability. They need to make sure that their metrics are green, that their environments are safe, and that that they have their own priorities, and then politics come into play. Again, finally, all of these things cost, right? An issue that doesn't get resolved immediately, the longer an issue takes to resolve, the higher the cost of resolving that issue. So what does DevOps culture do? Well, it transforms organizations from this to small integrated teams, right? The DevOps culture advocates small teams that own everything, right? You don't have teams where something is owned by this group, something is owned by that group, and then you have to know, okay, what happened? Well, this happened. Okay, now look at a manual and say, okay, because this happened, I'm going to call this person. Instead, in a DevOps culture-driven organization, if it's product X, you call one team, and within that team, everyone knows what's going on. So it makes that problem very manageable. You have automation, repeat-proof automated processes, right? Anytime you automate something, you've solved the problem. For all of their faults, computers are very good at repeating steps. Shared responsibility. It's no longer, well, it's not my job. I sent an email. No, everyone owns everything. Everyone knows everything. No one can say it wasn't my job, right? That disappear from the vocabulary. blameless collaboration, right? There's no more, well, it's X person's fault because they did. No, we all, if we share responsibility, we share the blame. And if we share the blame, there is no blame, right? We just focus on problem solving. Priorities are focused on delivering value. It's not about politics. It doesn't matter who said what. That if we're building a product, the customer is important. So if we're not building a product and if we're not adding features or if we're not making it to production, nothing else matters. Are we delivering value? And then obviously lower cost of delivery is a consequence of all of these things. Again, another snippet from this book. I'm going to reference these books, some books at the end of the presentation. Feel free to read, but I'll just read the top of this and you can read this offline. But instead of culture of fear, we have a high trust collaborative culture. Obviously, this is a snippet of someone talking about a culture of DevOps, where people are rewarded for taking risks. They're able to fearlessly talk about problems as opposed to hiding them or putting them on the back burner. After all, we must see problems in order to solve them, right? So the idea is that if we own the problem, if we're focused on delivering value, we're not looking at this, what's in it for me? You know, how can I be blamed? Or let me make sure I'm safe. Here, the focus is value delivery, so everyone focuses on fixing the problem. And there's no fear of taking blame. Okay, so we talked about the culture and we talked about what it means and all these things, but most of you are probably either currently DevOps engineers by title or want to be. So you're probably wondering, that sounds great. Does that mean I don't have a job? That's not necessarily the case. We're all DevOps, but we still have DevOps engineers. Okay, that sounds weird, right? It seems contradicting to what I said before because I'm saying it's shared responsibility. Well, not necessarily. Specialization is still important, right? DevOps engineers are the folks who focus on the aspects of DevOps engineering, and they are the experts. Even though I'm saying shared responsibility, we don't expect the PM or the QA engineer to know how to manage infrastructure or how to prevent security issues. So we still need specialization, and that's where DevOps engineers come into play. However, the thing that I always caution about is that there is no conversion formula, right? Before we talked about how we move from left to right in terms of culture. There's no simple conversion formula from the old world to the new world. And this is the natural instinct, right? Something new comes up and we say, okay, the PM is now a Scrum Master, done. Even though I don't believe that's the case there also, but in general, I don't believe that there's simple conversion formulas. And this is what many organizations do wrong, is that they go and just say, okay, well, you used to do X before, now your new title is this, and by default you are, let's say, a DevOps engineer. DevOps engineering is a new role. It's not something that you've done before. It's not a conversion. There is no conversion. If you were doing X before, unless you're truly doing DevOps engineering, you are not a DevOps engineer. It may sound disappointing to some of you, but I mean this as an encouragement, because there is a path to you becoming a DevOps engineer, and there's a huge benefit. But it's not a simple conversion formula. We're becoming a DevOps organization today, and therefore your title today is a DevOps engineer. Done. That's not the case. Admins, network engineers, ops, support engineers are not DevOps engineers unless they become DevOps engineers, right? There's a journey that everyone must take to become a DevOps engineer. And I say this specifically for these roles because I see this often. Someone who was doing admin work now calls themselves a DevOps engineer. And the problem is that you're not doing DevOps. You just change the title. Everything else is the same. In order for an organization to move toward DevOps, you need to change the culture. You need to change the approach. You need to add these processes. And unless you're doing that, then you're just, then truly, we go back to my first question, is this marketing hype, right? Because if you're doing this, then it's just marketing hype. You're just saying we're doing DevOps, right? Maybe you bought a product and you're saying, okay, well, I bought a product, now we're DevOps. this is not how you achieve the objectives of DevOps. I say this last one because I see this all the time. And I don't mean this because support engineers become DevOps. It's how others see DevOps engineers. I see this continuously. I see this with my clients. I see this even in some of the projects that we manage. We look at DevOps engineers as technical support. DevOps engineers are not technical support. There is no technical support in a DevOps culture. There's technical support for customers, but not for the teams. And DevOps engineers are definitely not technical support. Okay, so we talked a little about the history and what it means and a little bit about the people, but what does it mean for organizations? Where does your organization stand in terms of DevOps? Maybe you had an idea before the meeting, and maybe now you're wondering where you stand, or maybe you have an answer. But the answer is not simple, right? You can't just say yes, we do DevOps, or we're good with DevOps, or we don't have DevOps. You can't say either of these things, and the reason for that is because it's a spectrum, right? You're never in. No one is exactly doing DevOps or not doing DevOps. It's a spectrum. Where you fall in the maturity scale varies, right? Most companies that have not invested in DevOps are going to be in the first stage, right? You're in a reactive stage. Things happen and then you react. I'm not going to read through the slide, but let's say you're talking about database migrations, right? I still see this all the time with many of our clients. You have untracked database migrations. What happens when something goes wrong? It's reactive, right? There's no information. You have to go and chase people and you have to do investigations to find out what happened. You have to spend all this time just to find out what happened. You don't know who did what. And again, it's not a matter of blame. It's about finding why the issue happened. Same goes for all the different organizational levels. And then if you're moving along the maturity scale, the next stage is repeatable. You have some processes that can be repeated, right? Not everything is perfect, and you don't have everything that you need, but at least there's some things that, when you do it once, you can do it again with the same results. Then you move to a stable version. Okay, now you have that automation, those processes you have in place have produced a stable environment, but there's still multiple stages, and the ultimate stage you want to get to is optimized. Will every organization reach that level? Eventually. Do you need to be at that level? Not necessarily. There's a cost associated with all of these things, right? You may have read about companies like Netflix and Facebook and Google. It takes them, the latest number I know from Netflix was that it takes them 2 hours from a moment an issue is fixed to the moment it's live in production. What that means is that, number one, obviously for someone like Netflix, they can't rely on humans to validate that because they have millions of customers. They can't take that risk. So for something to take 2 hours to go from bug fix to production, it requires a lot of trust in the model. And so they have an optimized model where everything is done, and they know that if that code checks all the boxes, it went through all of the stress testing that it needs to go through, it's safe to take it to the customers. And most of us, if not all of us, use Netflix. How many times do we encounter a bug in Netflix? Very rarely. And the reason for that is because they have an optimized delivery pipeline. All right, finally, DevOps and You. This is why you're here, right? You want to learn about you so you can help your organization, or maybe just help your career prospects. What does it mean for you? What does all of this stuff mean for you? You don't need a title to be DevOps. We talked about this before. We're all DevOps. So if you're a tester, if you're a PM, if you're a developer, if you're any role that you have in the organization, you are DevOps. DevOps is a culture where we have shared responsibilities. When we do planning, when we find issues, when some of the natural culture, for example, that exists in terms of tester to developer relationship, tester's job is to find bugs, developer's job is to fix them. And then sometimes there's a culture clash between the two of them. One of them is saying this is a bug, the other one is saying it's not a bug. If both of them are thinking what's the best thing for the customer, then that conversation disappears, right? Because we're not saying, yes, this is good for the customer, we're saying it's not a bug. It's by definition not a bug. So we say, okay, well, it's not in the requirements. It means that someone missed it, so let's escalate it because this is an issue for the customer. We care about the value that we're delivering, not necessarily my job, because nobody has independent jobs. You own your results. Again, you do something, you don't say, well, I did my part, and now that other person is stuck, so the value hasn't been delivered, but it's not my job. Now you own it. If you're delivering X and you're blocked because, let's say you're a developer and you're blocked because a tester hasn't gotten to it, or the quote-unquote DevOps engineer hasn't been able to fix some infrastructure issue, then you pursue it. You say, how can I help? Is there anything I can do because I want to deliver this. I want to make sure that this goes all the way through. I'm delivering this value. I'm focusing on the value, not my job, not on a task. It's not important for me to just check off the task and say I did it. It's important for me to deliver this value as an end result. Participate, collaborate, and remember this shared responsibility model. When you're doing planning, for example, if the PM is missing something and you know that there's a dependency from A to B, make sure you let them know. If you're a DevOps engineer and someone's not thinking about, for example, about logging or security, or just think about, are you accounting for these things? Did you estimate the fact that you also need to make sure that this is done this way or that way? Everyone owns the whole thing. And the fact that it's a small team, this is possible. If you're working on a 30-person team, this is impossible. But if you're working on a 5-person team, then you need to know everything. Back to automation. Automate what you can, right? It's super important. And remember, I'm not saying as a DevOps engineer, you should automate. I'm saying as a team member, you should automate everything that you can. Anything that you have to do more than a few times, you should automate. And then when you automated everything that's possible, automate everything else. A principle that I've always shared is that everything can be automated if you try hard enough. Because sometimes we think, well, that part can't be automated. Sure, maybe not in a conventional way, but there is a way to automate everything. Unless you're relying on a human behavior, on a human action at the end, obviously that can be automated, but at least parts of it can be automated. Interaction, notifications, emails to remind them, things of that nature. And the most important piece of all of this is always learn. None of this works. None of this makes sense if you're not continuously learning and improving. And I know it's intimidating. I know there's a lot to learn, especially if you're new to this field. There's a lot, and it can be sometimes discouraging to know how much there is. But you know what? You start somewhere, and as long as you never stop learning, you're gonna get there. In a few years, you're gonna know all the basics. You're gonna know everything you need to know, and eventually you'll become an expert. But learning is important. Don't just learn a tool. It's not about learning a tool. Well, I know how to execute this process. I know this tool. Tools go away. Something is popular today, it's gonna go away in 2 years. Something better is gonna come out. Don't learn tools. Learn processes. Learn technology. Learn how everything works. Understand it. Make sure that you're not doing something just because you figured out how to get results. Understand what you're doing. Make sure that you understand every step of what you're doing, because things will change, and when they do, if you haven't learned it, then you'll run into issues. All right, so I've been talking about this recommended reading. Here it is. These two books are considered sort of the required reading. I've always considered these required reading for every team that I've led, and they're not new books, but they're excellent. The first one is a handbook. Really, it's a guide. It talks about everything that we talked about today. It has examples if you're not convinced. It has references, stories, and it's written by these guys that were the pioneers of this movement. So these are the guys that drove this movement. These are the guys that organized the first conference and gave it a name. So these are excellent books. And the second book is actually a novel, which is if you're worried about reading dry content, it's a great novel. And if you've lived this world before, when I read this book, I got anxiety because it related to everything that I had seen before. It's very realistically done. But it shows you how an organization can transform from, from what we had before, from left to right, and it does it in story mode. So I highly recommend both these books. The first one should be your handbook, your go-to book that you keep as a reference. The second one is just a enjoyable read.